Retirement, they tell you, is all about the 3 Gs: golf, geriatrics, and grandkids. I'd always found that a bit unimaginative. For my money, I opted for the 3 Bs: boats, beer, and bugger off. After 30 years of chasing Panamanian drug runners, plucking idiots off sinking fishing vessels, and generally staring down the wrong end of hurricanes for the United States Coast Guard, I figured I'd earned a little peace. A quiet corner of the world where my biggest decision of the day would be choosing between a lager and an IPA. So I bought a house in a place called Serenity Cove. The name alone should have been a red flag. Real Serenity doesn't need to advertise. It doesn't put up a big, offensively cheerful sign with curly font and frolicking dolphins. Real Serenity is quiet and unassuming. Serenity Cove, I would soon learn, was about as serene as a hornet's nest that had been kicked by a mule. My slice of this alleged paradise was a modest house with a fantastic, if slightly rickety, dock right on the main channel. It was the only thing I truly cared about. From that dock, I could see the shimmering expanse of the bay, feel the salt on the wind, and most importantly, I could be close to her. Not a woman. Something far more reliable and significantly less expensive in the long run. My boat. The Salty Dog, she was called. A 41-foot utility boat, a UTB in Coast Guard parlance, that I'd bought at a government auction and spent 2 years lovingly restoring to her former glory. She wasn't a yacht. She was a workhorse, built of aluminum and resolve, with clean, powerful lines and a no-nonsense demeanor. I'd kept her paint job a regulation haze gray, a color that screams, I mean business, but I'm also on a budget. She was my floating sanctuary, my therapist, my bar, and my escape pod, all rolled into one beautiful gray package. That particular Tuesday morning started like a dream. The Florida sun was a warm hand on my back. The coffee in my mug was black and strong, and a gentle breeze was making the palm fronds whisper sweet nothings. I walked out onto the dock, took a deep, satisfying breath of salty air, and prepared to do absolutely nothing of consequence for the rest of the day. That's when I saw it. It was an affront, a crime against aesthetics and common decency, a wound upon the otherwise flawless hull of the Salty Dog. It was a sticker, a huge 5x7-inch sticker, printed in a shade of neon orange so violent it could probably be seen from space. It was slapped right over the clean, white USCG-style letters spelling out her name. I shuffled closer, my coffee forgotten. My blood pressure, which a doctor once described as alarmingly placid, began a steady climb. In thick, black, authoritarian letters, the sticker read, HOA violation, unapproved watercraft, 14 days to remedy. I stared. I'd seen scarier things taped to boats, like, bundles of high-grade narcotics or the occasional stray limpet mine, but this felt personal. This was a declaration of war, written in fluorescent adhesive, and backed by the kind of passive-aggressive rage that could only be brewed in the deepest cauldrons of suburban discontent. Unapproved watercraft? What did that even mean? Was the water too wet for their liking? Did a local manatee file a noise complaint? I looked around, half expecting to see a tow truck designed for boats, maybe with a giant claw, ready to haul my 41 feet of retired government property off to some beige impound lot. My neighbor, a perpetually nervous man named Bob, whose entire personality seemed to be khaki shorts, scurried by on his morning power walk. He saw me staring at the sticker, and his eyes widened in what I could only describe as mortal terror. He immediately picked up his pace, his gaze fixed firmly on the pavement in front of him. "Hey, Bob!" I called out, my voice a little louder than intended. He flinched, stopping like a deer that had just heard a twig snap. He turned slowly, a pained smile plastered on his face. "Morning, Frank. Great day?" "That's debatable," I said, pointing a thumb at the orange monstrosity on my hull. "You know anything about this? Is there a roving gang of militant scrapbookers in the neighborhood I should know about?" Bob's eyes darted around as if assassins were hiding in the hibiscus bushes. He took a few steps closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh man, you got tagged." "I got what?" "Tagged," he repeated, the word heavy with dread. "It was Carol Peterson. She was making her rounds this morning." "Carol Peterson?" "The HOA president," he breathed. She has a clipboard and a golf cart. It's her chariot of fire. She sees everything." He looked at the sticker again and shook his head grimly. "An unapproved watercraft violation. That's a tough one. Good luck, Frank. You're gonna need it." And with that, he practically sprinted away, leaving me alone with the sticker and the dawning, horrifying realization that I hadn't just moved to Serenity Cove. I'd moved into a fiefdom, and I was about to meet the Queen. Later that afternoon, I was engaged in a losing battle with the sticker. The manufacturer had apparently used an adhesive with the bonding strength of a dying star. I was scraping away with a plastic putty knife, making about as much progress as a snail climbing a greased pole, when I heard the hum. It was a distinct sound, an electric whine that cut through the gentle lapping of the waves. I looked up and saw it, a pristine white golf cart, gliding silently down the path toward my dock. It had alloy wheels, a little canopy on top, and, flying from a tiny flagpole on the back, a purple flag bearing the intertwined letters SC. It was, as Bob had so accurately described it, a chariot of fire, or at least a chariot of profound irritation. The cart came to a halt. A woman in her early 60s disembarked. She was wearing a blindingly white tennis skirt, a pastel pink polo shirt tucked in with military precision, and a visor that seemed to be surgically attached to her forehead. Her hair was a helmet of blonde ambition, sprayed so stiffly it looked like it could deflect small arms' fire. In her left hand she held the source of all her power, a thick, leather-bound clipboard. It was Carol Peterson, I just knew it. She strode onto my dock with an air of ownership, her sensible white sneakers making soft, judgmental thuds on the wood. "Mr. Murphy, I presume," she said, her voice smooth and coated in a thin veneer of politeness that did nothing to hide the steel beneath. "I see you've received your notice." I set down my putty knife and gave her my most welcoming smile, which probably looked more like I was passing a kidney stone. "You mean this graffiti?" "Yeah, I was just about to call the cops. Vandalism, you know. It's a real problem these days." She did not smile back. Her expression remained as flat and unchanging as a tide chart. "That is an official notice from the Serenity Cove Homeowners Association. Your vessel is in violation of Bylaw 7, Section 4, Subsection B, Prohibition of Commercial or Military-Style Watercraft." And I blinked. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this boat is about as commercial as a rubber ducky in a bathtub, and the only military action it's seen lately is my ongoing war on pelican poop." "It's gray," she stated, as if this was an open and shut case. "And it has no name." She pointed her pen at the spot where the sticker was now obscuring the words, "The Salty Dog." "It does have a name," I countered, my voice dangerously calm. "You just covered it with your arts and crafts project, and it's painted haze gray, an official maritime color designed to be unobtrusive, unlike, say, neon orange." "The bylaws are clear, Mr. Murphy," she said, tapping the clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. "The aesthetic harmony of our community is our paramount concern. That boat is intimidating to the other residents. It's an eyesore that lowers property values." I let out a short, sharp laugh. I couldn't help it. "An eyesore? It's a classic 41-foot UTB. It's a piece of American history. What do the other residents have? Pontoon boats named Not on Call and jet skis that sound like angry mosquitoes? This boat has character. It has integrity. It has a violation notice, she retorted, unmoved. You have 14 days to remedy the situation. I suggest you paint it, perhaps a nice teal or a tasteful beige. I felt a nerve in my temple begin to twitch. I am not painting my boat beige. I'd rather scuttle it. The choice is yours, she said with a dismissive little shrug. You can, of course, appeal the violation at our monthly HOA meeting. It's next Wednesday. She gave my half-scraped sticker a disapproving look, then turned on her heel and glided back to her chariot. With another silent hum, she was gone, leaving a trail of smug satisfaction in her wake. I stood there for a long moment, the useless plastic scraper in my hand. The battle lines had been drawn, the first shot had been fired, and it had been fired from a golf cart. I looked at the offending sticker, then back at my beautiful gray boat. A slow, determined anger began to burn away my disbelief. She wanted a war? Fine. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She might have a clipboard and a book of petty rules, but I had 30 years of experience in bureaucracy, bullheadedness, and outmaneuvering people far more powerful than she could ever dream of being. Beige, I muttered to the empty air. She's got to be kidding me. This wasn't just my boat anymore. This was a hill I was willing to die on. My own personal, floating, gray Alamo. A few days later, my simmering war with Carol Peterson had to be put on a back burner. A more pressing project demanded my attention. My dock. The thing was a relic, probably built around the same time as the pyramids, and every time I walked on it, it groaned like a dying man. If I was going to enjoy my retirement, I needed a sturdy, reliable platform from which to conduct my primary business of doing nothing. The good-enough docks and decks truck that rumbled up my driveway was a testament to its name. It was a 20-year-old Ford, more rust than paint, but it had a certain blue-collar charm. Two figures emerged. The first was a young guy who bounded out of the driver's side, all sunshine and kinetic energy. He had shaggy blonde hair bleached by the sun, a faded surf shop t-shirt, and a smile that could disarm a bomb. This was Dave. The second figure emerged from the passenger side with the speed and enthusiasm of a tectonic plate. He was an older man, built like a fire hydrant, with a grizzled beard and a face that looked like it had been carved from a single, grumpy piece of oak. This, I would learn, was his uncle, Gary. "Mr. Murphy," Dave said, striding forward with his hand outstretched. "Dave from Good'Nuff. Man, this place is killer." "Call me Frank," I said, shaking his hand. "Glad you could make it." Dave's eyes immediately fell on the salty dog, and his jaw went slack. "Whoa, righteous boat, man. Is that a 41? "Good eye," I said, a little surprised. "You know your boats." For sure," he grinned. "My Uncle Gary here." He gestured to the silent man who was now slowly unloading tools. "He could build you a canoe out of toothpicks and spite. He loves these old workhorses." Gary grunted in what I took to be acknowledgement. "So," Dave continued, turning his attention to the dock. "This old girl, she's a teardown, yeah?" "She's seen better days," I agreed. "I want composite decking, new pilings, the works. A dock that won't send me into the drink if I sneeze too hard." I paused, then decided to get it over with. "But there's a dragon I have to warn you about. Her name is Carol." Dave's breezy smile tightened. "Peterson? The HOA lady?" "The one and only." "Oh, yeah," he said, shaking his head. "We know Carol. She tried to fine us last year on a job over on Pelican Court. Said our truck was too loud. Gary just stared at her for like a full minute without blinking. She got all flustered and left." Gary, who was now lining up sawhorses, grunted again. It sounded vaguely proud. "Well, she's already taken an interest in me," I said. "Tagged my boat for being military style." Dave whistled. "That's a new one. She usually sticks to lawn maintenance and trash can placement. You must be special." "I feel special?" I said dryly. "Anyway, I have all the county permits right here, and I even have the original HOA approval for the dock plans from before I closed on the house. I'm trying to do this by the book." "By the book is the only way to fly with her," Dave said, his tone suddenly serious. "Don't worry, Frank. We'll be clean, we'll be quiet as we can be, and we'll get this done. But I'd keep that paperwork handy. Her rulebook has more plot twists than a mystery novel." He wasn't wrong. As they started the demolition of the old dock the next morning, the sound of splintering wood was like a dinner bell for the Queen of the Cove. Carol's golf cart appeared as if summoned by the noise. She zipped right up to the edge of my property, clipboard at the ready. "Mr. Murphy!" she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This noise is unacceptable. It's disrupting the neighborhood's serenity." I ambled over, hands in my pockets. It was 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Carol, it's called construction. It's how things get built. It's not a Kenny G concert. People are generally awake at this hour." "Work is only permitted between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays," she snapped, as if she'd caught me in a major felony. I made a show of looking at my watch. "Well, what do you know? It's 10:30. By my math, we're well within that window. Even using advanced naval calculus and accounting for tidal drift, the numbers check out." Dave, ever the diplomat, chimed in. "No worries, ma'am. We're just taking out the old stuff. It's the loudest part." Carol ignored him, her laser-like gaze fixed on me. But before she could respond, Gary, who had been methodically prying up a rotten board, stopped. He straightened up, sledgehammer in hand, and turned his head slowly to face her. He didn't say a word. He just stared. It was a magnificent stare. It was a stare that had seen things, a stare that had forgotten more about intimidation than Carol would ever know. It was a stare that said, "I eat clipboards for breakfast." Carol's mouth opened, then closed. She blinked. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She looked from Gary's unmoving form back to me, then huffed, made a furious note on her clipboard, and zipped away. I looked over at Dave, who was trying to stifle a laugh. "The stare," he whispered reverently, "works every time." The small victory felt good, but I knew it was just the opening skirmish. The real battle was yet to come. And as the first new piling for my dock was being set, I had the distinct feeling that I was building more than just a place to tie up my boat. I was building a fortress. The next day, the war escalated. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I saw the flashing blue and red light sweep across my living room wall. I peeked out the window to see a police cruiser parked in my driveway. A part of me was almost impressed by her efficiency. I met the two officers at the door. The older one, whose name tag read Miller, had the weary, soul-crushed expression of a man who had seen the absolute worst of humanity, and most of it involved disputes over property lines. The younger one, Schmidt, had a glimmer of amusement in his eyes, a sign that the job hadn't beaten the life out of him just yet. "Sir, are you Frank Murphy?" Miller asked, his voice a monotone sigh. "Last I checked," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Did I win something? I never win anything?" Miller's sigh deepened. "We received a call about a public nuisance, something about an illegal commercial vessel being docked here." I couldn't help but smile. "Ah, the Gray Ghost of Serenity Cove. Yes, that would be my boat. Guilty as charged. She's retired, just like me. Her most dangerous cargo these days is a cooler full of light beer and the occasional half-eaten bag of pretzels." "We just need to take a look, sir," Schmidt said, trying to sound official. "Procedure." "Be my guest. I said, waving them toward the backyard. "Watch your step. The dock's a work in progress. Wouldn't want a workers' comp claim on top of everything else." They walked out to the backyard and stood there for a moment, looking at the salty dog floating peacefully in the channel. They looked at the boat. They looked at each other. Miller rubbed the bridge of his nose. "So, this is it?" Schmidt finally asked, the grin he was fighting finally breaking through. "That's her," I confirmed. "Terrifying, I know. Watch out, she might splash you with her flagrant disregard for aesthetic harmony." "Sir, we're just obligated to respond to the call," Miller said, his voice pleading for understanding. "The dispatcher? She said something about impersonating a military vessel?" I threw my hands up in mock surrender. "You got me. My plan was to launch a naval invasion of suburbia, annex the community pool, and declare myself admiral of the cul-de-sac. You foiled my brilliant scheme." Schmidt let out a snort of laughter he tried to disguise as a cough. Miller shot him a look. "All right, sir," Miller said, turning back to me. "Clearly there's no issue here. Sorry to have wasted your time." "No bother, officers," I said. "I know how it is. You're just doing your job. The person making you do your job, however." I let the sentence hang in the air. As they walked back to their car, I saw Miller shake his head and say something to his partner. Schmidt laughed. It was a small thing, but it felt like I'd just gained two unwilling, unofficial allies. Carol had brought in the law. It was time for me to escalate in my own way. The next morning, I delved into an old sea chest and retrieved a priceless weapon. My complete set of international maritime signal flags. She wanted official? I'd give her official. She operated with a flimsy binder of rules written by some power-crazed accountant in 1998. I had the entire goddamn international code of signals at my disposal, a system of communication honed over centuries of naval tradition. It was like bringing a nuke to a knife fight. I'd installed a tall, handsome flagpole next to the dock shortly after I moved in, intending to fly Old Glory and maybe a Don't Tread on Me flag when I felt particularly cantankerous. Now it had a new, more glorious purpose. Day one, I hoisted two flags, the blue and white checkered U flag and the red, white, and blue C flag. To the untrained eye, it was just a colorful nautical display. To anyone with a code book, or to me, narrating the story in my head, it meant, "You are running into danger." The next day I hoisted the K flag, yellow and blue, which meant, "I wish to communicate with you." I left it up for an hour, then lowered it and raised the N flag, a blue and white checkerboard, which meant simply no. I could see her from my kitchen window. She was out there in her golf cart, parked at the edge of the public path, staring at my flagpole through a pair of powerful binoculars. She was furiously flipping through her HOA rule book, a look of pure, concentrated frustration on her face. She knew I was mocking her. She just couldn't prove it. My masterpiece came on day 3. I hoisted a simple 3-flag combination, W, T, and P. I'll leave it to your imagination what that stood for, but it felt deeply, profoundly satisfying. The inevitable summons arrived in my mailbox a few days later. A crisp, white envelope with the Serenity Cove logo. I was being called before the full HOA board to answer for my crimes. The community clubhouse was exactly as I'd pictured it. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige folding chairs. The air tasted of stale coffee and quiet desperation. About a dozen residents were present, a mix of bored-looking spouses and a few hardcore Carol sycophants who nodded at everything she said. Carol, sitting at the head table like a queen presiding over her court, ran the meeting with an iron fist. She presented the case against the salty dog with the gravity of a war crimes tribunal. She showed enlarged photos of my boat, pointing out its aggressive gray color and intimidating profile. "This is not what Serenity Cove is about," she said, her voice filled with manufactured emotion. "We are a community of harmony, of beauty. This thing is a scar on our waterfront." When it was my turn, I stood up, feeling calm and strangely energized. I was in my element. Bureaucracy, ridiculous rules, hostile committees. It was like being back at Coast Guard headquarters. "Good evening," I began, letting my eyes drift over the board members. "First, I'd like to thank the board for this opportunity to discuss my boat, which seems to have become the most controversial vessel since the Titanic. Let's address the charges. First, the boat's registration, which I have provided to the board, clearly lists it as a private recreational vessel. It is legally no different from Mr. Henderson's base boat over on Lot 42. Mr. Henderson looked up, startled to be mentioned. "Second," I continued, "the military-style claim is entirely subjective. My toaster is also gray and made of metal, but I haven't seen any complaints about it launching a breakfast-based assault on the neighborhood's harmony. Third, and most importantly, the bylaws, which I have read, believe me, I have read them, prohibit commercial or military vessels. This boat is neither. It is a retired boat. The Coast Guard sold it. It is no more a military vessel than a decommissioned tank turned into a playground is an active weapon of war. Case closed." The sycophants looked confused. Logic was a foreign language to them. The board members just looked at Carol. She smiled a thin reptilian smile. "Thank you for your perspective, Mr. Murphy. Now, the board will vote." It was a landslide. Of course it was. They voted to uphold the violation and officially levy a $500 fine against me. I just nodded slowly. Understood. I gathered my papers and walked towards the door. I paused with my hand on the knob and turned back to them. "You know, for a place called Serenity Cove," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the beige room, "you all seem to be working overtime to make it as stressful as possible. Congratulations on that, I guess. It's quite an achievement." I walked out into the humid night air, not angry, but with a newfound clarity. This was no longer a game of petty annoyances. The final straw came via certified mail 3 days later. It was a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, informing me that since I had failed to pay the legally levied fine, late fees had been added, and if the full amount of $650 was not paid within 10 business days, the Serenity Cove Homeowners Association would be forced to place a lien on my property. A lien on my home, my castle, my little slice of bugger off that I had worked my entire life to secure. I was standing on the half-finished dock when I read it. Dave and Gary were hammering away, making good progress. The sun was warm, the water was calm, and I was holding a declaration of total war in my hand. Carol had just made a critical, tactical error. She had confused a sleeping bear for a house cat, and she had just poked that bear directly in the eye with a stupid, legally binding stick. My amusement had officially evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The game had changed. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to plan an offensive operation. My eyes fell on a brightly colored flyer Dave had tacked to a piling to keep it from blowing away. It was for the annual town festival. The Founders' Day celebration, and the main event, the grand finale, was the Founders' Day boat parade. The flyer mentioned that, as always, the parade would be led by an escort vessel from the local U.S. Coast Guard station. I looked from the flyer to the salty dog, floating there, so gray and proud. I looked back at the threatening letter in my hand. A slow, wicked, and deeply satisfying grin spread across my face. Oh, this was going to be good. This was going to be better than good. It was going to be biblical. The week leading up to the Founders' Day boat parade was one of meticulous preparation. Operation Vindicated Captain was a go. First, I had a frank discussion with my construction crew. "Boys," I said, gathering Dave and Gary on the dock, "I have a special request. I need this dock 100% complete, cleaned up, and looking like $1 million by Saturday morning. Not Saturday afternoon. Saturday morning." Dave looked at the remaining work. "That's a tall order, Frank. We'd have to work late." "There's a $1,000 bonus in it for you if you get it done," I said. "And a front row seat to the best show this town has ever seen. Plus a victory cruise with a fully stocked cooler afterward." Dave's eyes lit up. $1,000? And a show?" He looked at his uncle. Gary stopped sanding a board, squinted at me, then at the boat, then back at me. He gave a single, decisive nod. "We're in," Dave said. "Uncle Gary is intrigued by your promise of a show. He's a big fan of drama." Next, I turned my attention to the salty dog. I spent 2 full days cleaning and polishing her until her haze-gray hull had a soft satin sheen. I polished every piece of brass and chrome until it gleamed. She looked less like a retired workboat and more like a museum piece ready for inspection. The final piece of the puzzle arrived by special delivery on Thursday. It was a small, unassuming cardboard box. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, was a crisp, new, white formal dress shirt, the kind worn with the service dress white uniform. And alongside it, a pair of gleaming captain's shoulder boards. The 4 wide gold stripes of an 06, topped with the silver Coast Guard shield. I hadn't worn them in years. I held them in my hand, the weight of them both familiar and strange. They represented 30 years of my life, a lifetime of service that a woman in a golf cart had tried to reduce to a bylaw violation. I laid them out on my dresser with the reverence of a knight preparing his armor. Dave and Gary were true to their word. They worked into the evening, with portable lights illuminating the dock. By Friday night, it was done. The new composite decking was perfect, the lines were clean, the pilings were solid. It was a work of art, a worthy stage for the final act. Saturday morning dawned bright, clear, and hot. The air was thick with anticipation. All along the seawall that lined the channel, my neighbors were setting up lawn chairs and coolers. The Founders' Day boat parade was a big deal in this town. At precisely 10:30 a.m., I opened my front door and stepped outside. I wasn't wearing my usual fishing shorts and faded t-shirt. I was in full uniform. The brilliant white shirt was starched and immaculate. Black dress pants were creased to a razor's edge. And on my shoulders, the gold bars of a United States Coast Guard captain gleamed in the morning sun. I walked not with the casual amble of a retiree, but with the measured, purposeful stride of a man on a mission. And, of course, she saw me. Carol was already on patrol, her electric chariot gliding silently along the public path. She was adjusting a string of patriotic bunting on a light pole when she glanced over and saw me emerge. Her brain, I can only imagine, suffered a catastrophic failure. It was as if all her circuits fried at once. There was the man she'd been tormenting for weeks, the man she'd fined and threatened with a lien, and he was now dressed in a full, immaculate military uniform, walking toward the very boat she had declared illegal and an eyesore. It was a confluence of illegalities so vast, so flagrant, that it broke her. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions, confusion, disbelief, then pure, unadulterated rage. She dropped the bunting, whipped out her phone, and began to dial with trembling fingers. The first call, I later learned from my gleeful neighbor Bob, was to the other members of the HOA board. Her voice was a shriek that could be heard 3 houses down. "He's doing it! I told you! He's wearing a costume! He's flouting everything we stand for!" The second call was to the police. I could practically hear the sigh from Officer Miller's soul all the way across the neighborhood. "It's Carol Peterson again, the man at 12 Serenity Way. He's impersonating a military officer. It's a federal crime. You have to arrest him, now." But it was her third call that was the master stroke, the one I had been counting on. Fueled by righteous fury and a complete lack of self-awareness, she found the number for the local Coast Guard station online. "Hello? Coast Guard?" she screeched into the phone. "There is a man in a fake uniform on an illegal military boat in Serenity Cove. He's a menace to navigation. You need to send a patrol immediately. He's about to enter the parade." The commotion, as intended, was drawing a crowd. Neighbors, intrigued by Carol's public meltdown, were now all standing and staring in my direction. Dave and Gary, sitting on the end of my brand-new dock with a couple of Cokes, had the best seats in the house. This was the show they were promised. I calmly walked down to the Salty Dog, untied the bowline, and started the engine. The twin diesels rumbled to life with a deep, satisfying thrum. First to arrive were the police. Miller and Schmidt's cruiser pulled up quietly. They got out, but they didn't approach. They just stood by their car, arms crossed, two spectators who had been given free tickets. Miller looked like he was seriously contemplating a career in alpaca farming. Then came the main event. From down the channel, a vessel appeared, moving fast. It wasn't one of the parade boats. It was a USCG response boat, its orange and white hull cutting cleanly through the water, a low blue light flashing on its mast. Carol was ecstatic. She started pointing, her face a triumphant mask. "See! See!" she yelled to the assembled crowd. "I told you! They're here to arrest him! They're here to take his boat!" The Coast Guard boat slowed as it approached my dock, its wake gently rocking the Salty Dog. It was crewed by 3 young service members, all looking sharp and professional in their operational dress uniforms. A young lieutenant, no older than 25, was at the helm. He had that hard, all-business look I knew so well. He was here to deal with a problem. I stood calmly on the deck of my boat, my hands clasped behind my back, and waited. The lieutenant picked up his boat's hailer, his voice booming across the water, amplified and official. "Sir, on the gray vessel, we've had a report of a man impersonating an officer and operating an unauthorized vessel. Can you identify yourself?" The entire neighborhood was silent. You could hear a seagull sneeze. Carol was practically vibrating with vindication. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I pitched my voice so it would carry the old command voice that I hadn't used in years. "I'm Frank Murphy, retired," I called out. "This is my vessel, the Salty Dog." The lieutenant squinted against the sun, his eyes trying to get a clear look at me. He was still in enforcement mode. Then his gaze settled on my shoulders. He saw the uniform shirt. He saw the 4 wide gold bars. His eyes, even from 30 feet away, went wide. The hard, official mask on his face didn't just crack. It shattered, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock, which quickly morphed into respect. He knew the rank. He spun around to his crew. His voice was no longer a boom. It was a sharp, urgent command. "On your feet! Attention!" The 2 young crewmen, who had been ready to toss a line, snapped instantly to attention, their backs ramrod straight. The lieutenant turned back toward me. He took one step to the side of his boat's cabin, into full view of everyone on shore. He brought his heels together, and he rendered a slow, perfect, textbook salute, a gesture of profound respect from one generation of the service to another. His voice, now stripped of all amplification, was clear and respectful in the quiet air. "Captain," the single word echoed across the water. The sound of Carol Peterson's jaw hitting the paved walkway was almost audible. The crowd of neighbors was utterly silent. their brains collectively trying to process what they had just witnessed. Officer Miller, over by his cruiser, finally lost his battle for composure. A huge, unprofessional grin spread across his face. Schmidt was actively laughing into his hand. I stood a little taller, a lifetime of pride swelling in my chest. I brought my own hand up and returned the salute with equal precision. "As you were, Lieutenant," I said, my voice steady. "Beautiful day for a parade, isn't it?" The young officer relaxed, a sheepish grin now on his face. "Yes, sir, we're on escort duty. Had no idea you'd be joining us, Captain. It's an honor, sir." "The honor is all mine," I replied. "You run a sharp crew." He beamed. With a final, respectful nod, he returned to his helm, gave a short toot of his horn, and the Coast Guard boat sped off to take its official position at the head of the parade. The show was over. The police cruiser quietly pulled away. The crowd of neighbors began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves, stealing glances at Carol, who was now an object of pity and ridicule. She stood frozen for another 10 seconds, her face a pale, slack mask of humiliation. Then, without a word, she turned, shuffled to her golf cart, and drove away. She looked smaller. I turned to Dave and Gary, who were applauding from the end of the dock. "Well, boys," I said with a grin, "how about that victory cruise I promised you?" Dave was ecstatic. "Righteous, Captain, absolutely righteous." Gary, the stoic, the silent, the unmovable, cracked a rare, wide smile. He looked at me, looked at the empty path where Carol had been, and gave a slow, deliberate thumbs up. A few days later, a plain, unstamped envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a short, typed letter from the HOA, informing me that, upon review, the violation had been dismissed and the fine had been waived. There was no signature. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Carol had resigned from the presidency due to personal reasons and was considering selling her house. I haven't seen a golf cart with a purple flag since. My life in Serenity Cove is finally serene. But it's not the boring, beige, rule-book kind of serene. It's the kind you earn, the kind that comes with a freshly polished boat, a brand-new dock, and the sweet, sweet memory of a tyrant getting her public comeuppance in front of the entire neighborhood. Sometimes you don't need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you just need to remind people who you are. And showing up in the right uniform doesn't hurt either.